Williams Jr., hillbilly of the country. What the heck is this all about? This ain't cool.
Hank Williams Jr. has been electrifying audiences since he was a kid.
His mother pushed him out on stage when he could barely hold a guitar.
He's the son of a legend, and the fight for his own identity nearly killed him.
Walking in the footsteps of the greatest country singer of all time is quite a job.
That guy was just born into turmoil.
It's a miracle he survived at all.
But this is one Southern rebel with a cause.
He had to dig his own trenches. He had to be true to himself.
His music moves him to go out there and just spank the plank all night long.
Yeah, it's my rock and rebel father.
Hank Williams Jr., now on Biography.
Country music singers. Oh, it's been a real close family.
Hank Williams Jr. is one of the most successful country acts ever.
They do songs about the boys and me.
With his rare musical genius, he has turned country music into a worldwide phenomenon.
He's huge in Japan. Even in like Ireland, they're huge fans of my dad.
I guess you could say I some changed my direction.
But his most diehard fans are still back home.
We love Hank. We love what he's all about.
Why you don't smoke? Woo-hoo.
His show is one huge party. But success didn't come easy. As the son of the great Hank Williams, Hank Jr.'s rise to the top has been a pitched battle that nearly killed him.
He dealt with more than any other country artist ever had to. People telling him all the time, you're not good, you'll never be as good as your daddy.
Behind the clean country boy image, the young star was hiding a host of problems.
What do you mean, cocaine? You better settle down here.
Drugs, alcohol, a series of difficult marriages, and a suicide attempt. And then came the tragic accident that would scar him for life.
And he fell off a mountain. Many of us didn't even know if he would survive.
To survive, Hank Jr. had to break free from the grip of one of the most powerful legends in American folklore, his own father. In the late 1940s, Hank Williams Sr. was a rising star in the country music world.
Hank Sr. talked about life. He talked about soul.
At the time, it was revolutionary. At the time, it was something that hadn't been heard before.
He had grown up in poverty in Alabama, raised by a single mother during the Great Depression. Hank Williams knew firsthand the hardships of hillbilly life.
He was living in small places. He was trying to get by. He was also drinking a lot. He had a rough time of it personally.
He was writing great songs, and he was singing with a voice that just had so much passion and heartache and soul. There was a real black influence in some of his music. I mean, there was some blues in there, you know, mixed in with the country.
Despite his enormous talent, Hank Williams might have fallen through the cracks if he had not met Audrey Mae Shepherd, a vivacious woman who grew up on an Alabama farm, dreaming of fame and fortune. They met in 1943 at one of Hank's small outdoor shows. Audrey knew right away that he would make it big.
He was in Mobile shipyard building ships in 1944. They came here, and she said, your songs are good, your music is good.
Audrey brought him to Nashville to pitch his songs. It was then that Hank Sr. began to write tunes like Honky Tonkin', Move It On Over, and You're Cheatin' Hard.
There may not have been a Hank if there hadn't been an Audrey.
Despite her mediocre voice, Audrey wanted to perform with Hank, but her real strength was in promotion.
Audrey was a hard businesswoman. She didn't like women. You know, she was more in the men's world.
Audrey had a daughter, Lucretia, from a previous marriage. She and Hank Williams Sr. married in 1944, and in May of 1949, they had a little boy, Randall Hank Williams. They called him Bocephus.
Bocephus is a ventriloquist dummy that belonged to Grand Ole Opry comedian Rod Brassfield.
A perfect name for someone who would later be cast in his father's image. He was just 1 month old when his father made his debut at the Grand Ole Opry.
I try so hard, my dear, to show that you're my everything.
The Opry had never seen anything like it. People went bonkers.
There were 7 encores that night, and a country star was born.
That was the Drifting Cowboys. I was proud to be a part of that.
But as Hank's fame grew, so did his personal problems. He was a hard drinker and a hopeless womanizer. He took pills for chronic back pain. He often performed so drunk he could barely stand.
I didn't like that side of him when he would do his drunk bit.
As the drinking got worse, Hank's life went into a tailspin. He stopped showing up for work, and the Opry fired him. Then, Audrey filed for divorce. To fill the emotional void in his life, he quickly married 19-year-old Billie Jean Jones. It was a strange wedding on a stage at a show in Louisiana. 3-year-old Bocephus didn't notice the turmoil in his family, but it would haunt him throughout his life. New Year's Eve, 1952. His father was on his way to a concert in Ohio. He never made it. He died while sleeping in the backseat of his blue Cadillac. The official cause of death was heart failure, but alcohol and pills played a role. 20,000 mourners came to say goodbye. In death, Hank Williams became an even bigger star. Some say a fistfight broke out that day between ex-wife Audrey and the new wife, Billie Jean. When the dust settled, Audrey Williams became the sole owner of the music rights. And so, on the tiny shoulders of little Bocephus fell a great responsibility. Heir to the country throne that was created by his father.
He was born, to royalty. And he had everything and he had nothing.
His father was gone. But at the family's house on Franklin Road in Nashville, his father's things were everywhere. Guitars, music, and loaded guns.
I knew right where it was. I climbed right up there, got on the stool, pulled it out, went out in the yard. Bang! Oh my God, I hate these things. It was loud. Put it back. And, luckily no damage was done.
Perhaps to fill the void of his missing father, little Bocephus embraced his daddy's pastimes completely. When it came to learning music, his father's friends were always nearby.
It's extraordinary to think about the people who just lined up to be helpful.
Bocephus learned music from the likes of Johnny Cash, Fats Domino, and Jerry Lee Lewis, who often sat with him at the piano.
Keep that left hand going, son. I think I'm gonna listen to what he has to say.
In her precocious little boy, Audrey Williams saw a way to preserve her husband's memory and reignite the family business. She taught him his father's way of speaking and all his mannerisms. While most kids his age were learning to throw a baseball, Bocephus was learning how to be Hank Williams. Then she renamed him Hank Williams Jr., and she sent him out on stage. He was 8 years old.
Those had to be some of the most pressure-filled moments of his whole life. He had to please his mother. He had to honor his father. And somehow in that, he had to entertain crowds.
Little Hank's first gig was in Swainsboro, Georgia. The stage was tiny, and the auditorium was filled to the brim. His act caught the attention of Rita and Buddy Lee, a wrestling duo looking to promote country acts.
He just heard that there was a son, but he hadn't heard his music yet. But when he did hear him, he said, "I think we have a superstar."
By the time he was 9 years old, Hank Williams Jr. was ready to hit the road and perform his dad's music.
he had the name already, Hank Williams, you know. It was just getting him going.
Buddy and Rita Lee used Hank Jr. as the opening act to their wrestling shows to give him some stage time while attracting a country audience to their shows. The plan worked like a charm.
Yes, Hank Jr. will be with us. He's now 9 years old.
Hello, everybody. Like my daddy said, the good Lord's willing and the creeks don't rise, I'll see you.
That's right.
It started to be a whole lot of shows.
His mother, Audrey, and his agent, Buddy Lee, went into business together. The savvy partners knew they had struck gold. When he was only 11 years old, Hank Jr. received the invitation of a lifetime from the Grand Ole Opry. Once on stage, he barely had to open his mouth. People in the audience were beside themselves.
Elderly people, women taking out their hankies and wiping off their tears, you know, because he did sound a lot like Hank Sr.
They're either laughing or crying. Why are they crying? Gosh, I must have done something bad. Why are they laughing? They're all like, ah, or, you know.
It was overwhelming for the 11-year-old Hank Jr. He didn't yet understand the power of his father's songs, or why he was suddenly in big demand. Then Audrey put together the Caravan of Country Stars, featuring singers like Carl Perkins, the Big Bopper, Johnny Cash, and of course, Audrey, Lucretia, and Hank Jr. After 2 years, Lucretia, who had never enjoyed the spotlight, got married and left the Caravan. Each weekend, the musicians would cram all their equipment in a 48 Packard and drive to gigs all over the South.
In the car with the trailer in the back and the bass fiddle on top.
By the time he was 14, Hank Jr. was a seasoned performer, and his voice had changed.
Thank you. I'd like to do a song now that my father wrote with a lot of feeling, and I hope I can sing it with half as much feeling.
I tried so hard, my dear, to show that you're my every dream. Yet you're
On December 29, 1963, Hank Jr. appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. Everyone was impressed, except for the young star.
Here's a kid on Ed Sullivan, you know, I mean, I really was, too, you know, that's just doing one of his daddy's songs, imitating his father, that's all it was.
You're down for mine and melt your cold, cold heart.
The show catapulted young Hank into superstardom. Audrey hired a tutor so he could tour full-time. Buddy and Rita Lee became the biggest promoters in Nashville. Hank was only 14 years old. He had a contract with MGM and was earning $300,000 a year. But behind the glitzy image, he was just a kid who wanted to play and have fun.
Halloween, and Hank Jr. came over. He said, come on, let's go do something. So this guy had a convertible. He wrapped tissue paper all around this car. It was, and I was on the lookout so the guy wouldn't be looking out the window.
Hank Jr. owned a Civil War cannon, which he kept in his front yard. He and his good friend Johnny Cash used it to wake up the neighborhood.
Johnny loved to come over and shoot it. The neighbors would call my mother and say, would you please tell them to stop? They're knocking the books off of our shelves over here again.
Another musician who spent lots of time with Hank Jr. was Merle Kilgore, the man who later co-wrote the hit song Ring of Fire with June Carter Cash.
I said, oh, boy, I like this guy, Merle. You know, he was 30-something, acted like he was 14.
Merle was a character. He'd buy a bag full of toys. He'd say, now we're going to have some fun. So we'd sit on the floor and play with these toys.
I said, boy, I really like this guy. He'd sit up and play, you know, games with me and tell stories and all.
But it wasn't all child's play for Hank Jr.
There were all sorts of people who wanted the honor of being the guy to get little Bo Cephas drunk.
You know, you'd get ready to go on. There'd be somebody, they'd have a little bitty pint, and they, I mean, I was little. He'd say, oh, he'd hand it over there.
Eddie Pleasant was Hank Jr.'s valet at the time.
People would give him drinks all the time. I've seen him OD'd, I've seen him passed out, I've seen him every which way.
Oh, you're young and strong. You say, yeah, hey, man, hey, I can hang out. Are you kidding? Yeah, I'm here. That's easy to do.
When he was 14, he was seduced in the back of a concert hall by a groupie. She was a redhead, twice his age. His appetite for sex and drugs would become legendary.
Oh, you'd get up 5 o'clock in the morning, take some girl home that they had been partying with all night. Man, I've done that a many times.
Like his father before him, Hank Jr. also had a passion for gun collecting and hunting. Audrey had a car made for him with 6-shooter door handles, gun mounts on the fenders, and rare silver dollars lining every surface. Hank found the car embarrassing, but he managed to smile for the photos. By now, he was a full-fledged teen idol.
Well, I was 16, and I know there was over 200 shows that year.
As long as he kept on singing his daddy's songs, Hank Jr. made millions for himself, his agent, and his mother.
As a teenager, he was successful because he was a really good mimic. But that's a, that's a parlor trick, right? That's something you do at parties to get a laugh. That's not musical.
Not musical, but very lucrative. Hollywood was making a film about Hank's father called Your Cheatin' Heart. George Hamilton would star in it. Audrey wanted Hank Jr. to record the soundtrack, but movie execs were skeptical. As always, Audrey got her way. But when Hank Jr. wanted to bring his steady girlfriend along, the film's producers said no.
You can't bring your girlfriend. Nah, I had it all figured out. I'll show him. Came back here and brilliantly got married.
In his late teens, Hank Williams Jr. felt in awe of his father's talent. To better honor his music, he sought out members of the original Drifting Cowboys, like the legendary Don Helms.
And Hank Jr. said, you want to play some Hank? And I said, hell yeah, let's do it. And it sounded exactly like Hank Williams.
But once he mastered his father's sound, Hank Jr. had a startling revelation.
He doesn't need me. He doesn't need me to make him a legend. He really doesn't.
From that point on, Hank Jr. knew that he wanted to write and perform his own songs.
Hank had a vision, and he met a lot of resistance. It was difficult.
Some of that resistance came from those closest to Hank.
I said, well, that ain't worth 2 cents. I could say anything I wanted to him back then. I said, that ain't going to do no good.
He would do the Hank stuff, and they would just tear the house down, you know. I thought he surely ain't going to get away from that.
When Hank insisted on performing his own music in concerts, his fans revolted.
We played Louisville and emptied the house. There wasn't 90 people left out of 10,000. And, man, it looked like a graveyard.
No one wanted jacket that had made so many people so much money.
Well, they didn't want me to do my thing, just imitate Dad.
But one old friend, Merle Kilgore from the Caravan, would say, write your song. Celebration. Hank seized the moment.
He blew out the candles. Somebody said, speech. And he said, okay. And he walked up to the mic and he said, I want to tell all you SBs that from this day forward, ain't anybody ever going to tell me what to sing, what to play, how to stand, how to dress, no, nothing like that. He said, write it down.
Hank Jr. severed all business ties with his mother and Buddy Lee. Audrey was hurt and furious.
Buddy went his way, Hank went his way. After they split, they never talked again.
Then Hank met a musician and entrepreneur named Mike Curb.
We were at a restaurant, and a lady came up to him and said, "You'll never be what your father was." And Hank, who was very young at the time, looked over at her and said, "Ma'am, nobody will ever be what my father was."
Hank Jr. joined the Mike Curb congregation to create All for the Love of Sunshine, which became Hank's first #1 song.
All for the love of sunshine.
This was clearly not his father's music anymore. But despite his success, Hank Jr. knew this was still not his sound.
Being the son of Hank Williams, there's a lot of songwriting royalties from his father that he could have lived off of for the rest of his life. Instead, it seemed to really bother him that he wasn't getting at something on his own.
As Hank Jr. continued to feel trapped in the music of his past, he became attracted to a young woman who seemed to hold the keys to his freedom. Gwen Yeargain was bold, assertive, and determined to become an actress. She and Hank had met at a concert in Arkansas. They wrote to each other at first, then started getting together on the sly. When Hank was 23 years old, he divorced Sharon and married Gwen. In 1972, they had a son, Shelton, also known as Hank III. Fatherhood became a chance to be a kid again.
Oh, I can't wait to get him his first shotgun. I mean, really, that's the way guys are. If you have a newborn, the first thing you think about is buying him camo or a shotgun or a fishing rod, you might be a redneck.
For a time, Hank Jr. was happy in his new family, but he found that his old habits on the road were hard to break. And Gwen soon tired of being the wife of a country star with a roving eye.
Gwen would catch him with this and catch him with that. I mean, down the hallway in the same motel. So she finally left him on account of the women.
Well, why this isn't working out? Well, hell, why isn't this working out? And, well, nothing else is working out,
His wife left him. His fans rejected him, and he had blown a lot of his money partying. By age 24, Hank Jr. felt like a complete failure. It was 1973, a time when the feel-good drug of choice for musicians was cocaine.
But one time he had some white stuff, he was cutting it up, and I said, "What is that?" "Aspirin."
After a concert in Denver, Hank's valet was called to a hospital emergency room.
I go to the hospital, and he got the wars all over him, and the doctor, as soon as I walked in, the doctor said, "That cocaine's hard on a young man."
Within days of being released from the hospital, he overdosed again.
You can really get negative and get down on all that stuff.
To cope with his depression, he started taking Darvon, a painkiller. His father had died by mixing a similar drug with alcohol. One day, while he was home alone, he swallowed an entire bottle. A handyman, stopping by to do some work, found Hank barely conscious. At a Nashville hospital, a doctor took Hank aside.
This guy said, "You know what, I'm going to tell you like it is. You've been taught to look like, live like, act like, be like, exactly like your father, except he died at 29, you'll have him beat. You'll do it at 25 or 26. He said, if you keep up with this, that's what's going to happen.
By the time he turned 25, Hank Jr. had been courting death for a decade with drugs, alcohol, and a suicide attempt. In Nashville, everyone wanted him to be something he wasn't, and it was destroying him. Hank knew it was time to leave. He drove south to an Alabama river town where he could begin again.
Southern soul was really a Muscle Shoals thing. You go there and look around the town and it doesn't look like the sort of place where that would emanate from, but indisputably it was. There were just sounds in the air.
When he arrived, Hank Jr. found a musical melting pot of R&B, blues, southern rock, and country music.
Real loose and lots of fun. And not, we should do this song, we should do that song. No. We're going to do this song, we're going to do that song.
It's here that Hank began to jam with members of the Marshall Tucker Band, the Allman Brothers, and the big daddy of Southern rock, Charlie Daniels.
And that's when he really started blossoming, was when he kind of took a little turn off the lost highway, if you would.
For the first time in his life, Hank Jr. felt free.
He found a group of musicians that really accepted what he was, what he wanted to be.
Together, they created a new wave of country music.
Outlaw music. It is not being done by the law of the streets of Nashville, Tennessee.
Mostly it's outlaw in terms of just really breaking the rules of the way that things had been done in an industry town. You had a group of artists that really took control of the making of their music. They made the music that they heard in their heads.
After 15 years of singing, Hank Jr. finally had an album that was truly his own. Hank Williams Jr. and Friends, a blend of his own experiences with the sounds of Muscle Shoals. When he finished the record, Hank Jr. left town to relax in his favorite place on earth, the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. There, he would hike with his close friend, Dick Willie, and Dick's 11-year-old son, Walt.
Me and my father and Hank, just the three of us, went out to Ajax Mountain.
Near the top of the mountain, they came across a wide field of hard-packed, slippery snow.
We crossed the snowfield. I remember I went first, my father followed, and Hank last.
And I got out there and the whole thing went. It's just like an avalanche. Poof, you're gone. Just imagine falling out of an airplane.
He tumbled and tumbled and tumbled, and he looked like a rag doll falling off the mountain.
Hank fell over 500 feet, and then his face hit a boulder.
I remember let out a blood-curdling scream myself. It tore his eye out, tore his nose off. His forehead was, the bone in his forehead were pretty much gone. His brain was exposed. It was like something from a horror movie.
Dick Willie knew there was only a slim chance of saving Hank. He would have to race down the mountain and leave his 11-year-old son with his wounded friend.
I was petrified. I didn't want to stay there with Hank. It scared me. He was moaning and groaning and a lot of blood. It was gory.
His father's parting words, "Don't let him fall asleep. Keep talking, no matter what."
So I just rambled. That's about all I did. Talked about football and fishing and hunting.
He was talking about coon dogs, bird dogs. He was talking about every kind of dog in the world, every dog he'd ever owned.
He was losing tremendous amounts of blood.
Meanwhile, Walt's father had hiked down the mountain and radioed for help. But as the sun was going down, the rescue helicopter was having trouble locating Hank on the rugged mountain.
You could hear the blades of the helicopter over there, and he'd fly back over us, and he could not find us. If he wouldn't have found us, Hank would have never made it through the night on the mountainside.
Finally, after a 4-hour wait, the rescue helicopter arrived, and Hank began the 100-mile journey to the nearest hospital.
I was really hurting. They started cutting stuff off, and I said, "Don't cut my cross," and that's kind of the last thing I remembered.
Hank's brain had been exposed a long time up on the mountain. He had broken nearly every bone in his head, but his chief enemy was infection. As word got out, Hank Jr.'s family and friends poured into Missoula, Montana.
Johnny Cash and June Carter came out. I remember when they came out and visited with him. Audrey Williams, Hank's mother, came out.
I knew it was really working on my mother. When she saw me like that, I knew it was really working on her.
Audrey had been in poor health for years and died 3 months later. Merle Kilgore, Hank's best friend, who had seen him through many of life's challenges, feared the worst.
He didn't think I'd make it. He went across the street and got pretty bombed, and Dick Willie had to carry him, and, Merle weighed 275.
Doctors worked on Hank Jr. for over 12 hours that day. They told family members to brace themselves. The chance that he would recover was slim.
Every day the doctors said it was getting worse, it was getting worse. They said, you know, if he lived, he'd probably never sing or walk again.
8 days after he fell 500 feet off a mountain, doctors were confident that Hank Williams Jr. would live. But what kind of life would he have?
I remember walking in his room at the hospital and seeing Hank, and it was a sight that I'll never forget. It wasn't Hank anymore.
When I saw myself the first time, yeah, that was the worst. And there was one mirror in there, and I kind of looked over, and there was one, and I saw a face, and I thought, oh, boy. And I really mentally shut down from that day on for quite a while.
The accident had crushed his face, shattered his jaw, and left him blind in one eye.
There's just no way you can ever gonna talk again, correctly sing again.
It took 9 reconstructive surgeries to rebuild Hank's broken face. To hide the scars that remained, he adopted a new look that would become his trademark: hat, sunglasses, and beard. After 50 days, Hank was released from the hospital. He left with a second chance at life and some strong advice from a doctor.
I don't know if you're supposed to go over here and count the L curve or the deer or write song, but boy, you've been left here to do something, because you're just not supposed to make it through this deal.
Hank recuperated at the Willie home in Montana.
His jaws were wired shut. He'd come down and watch cartoons with us in the afternoons, and Hank would get laughing so hard that he'd have to leave the room. It would hurt him to laugh.
In this interview, Hank Jr. was still weak from his accident, but more determined than ever about his career.
When I was about 19 or 20, I started having rumblings about, hey, maybe I'd like to play my own music, or the kind of thing I like to play. I am not Hank Williams. I'm Bocephus Hank Jr.
Life was returning to normal, but Hank was convinced that his love life was over. Before the accident, he had one date with a woman named Becky White.
It's very strange because she swears she was not going to go out with him again. They went on one date before the mountain fall, and supposedly he was rowdy and danced on a table, and she's very sweet, proper, perfect Christian Southern girl.
But when Becky heard about Hank's accident, she felt sorry for him.
I said, you don't want to see me, you don't want to see me. You know, I don't want to see you, and you don't want to see me. You need to go on with your life.
But Becky insisted on seeing him again.
And I guess she said, well, you look all right to me, whatever that is.
That's when she got to see him as a man and as a person instead of this kind of wild guy that she had thought. And I guess they fell in love and got married and had us.
It was 1977. A new life was beginning with Becky. Hillary was born the following year. In 1980, Holly came along, and Hank had a new family. The album Hank Jr. recorded before the accident was released to rave reviews. A new musician was emerging. He had lost some vision and hearing, but his guitar fingers were now more sensitive, and his voice became stronger.
The way that he heard his voice inside his head changed, caused him to sing harder, caused him to sing louder, and that's where you get that big bellowing Bocephus sound that really caught on.
Country music singers have always been a real close-knit family.
Less than a year after his accident, Bocephus hit the road. He dug into his roots and his hard partying past and released Family Tradition.
You don't want to know, Hank, why do you drink? Why do you go slow? Why must you live by
mean, that's poetry, honey. That is absolute poetry. Shakespeare didn't do it no better than Hank Jr.
I get stoned and sing all night long. It's a family tradition.
The new album went gold. Hank Jr. was now 30 years old, and he was on fire. His concerts soon became the stuff of legends.
It becomes a huge celebration of life, of the music, just being able to do everything and get away with it.
The music was inspired by the experiences of this larger-than-life, born-again bad boy. By 1982, he had 9 albums on the Billboard charts at one time. The good times rolled for Hank Jr. and all his rowdy friends.
The early 80s was a lot of fun.
Tar whiskey been in hellbound.
A lot of women, a lot of fun, a lot of song, a lot of good times, a lot of swimming pools at night with all your clothes on.
No hotel was ever the same after a visit from the Hank Jr. crowd.
He comes in, he's excited, we're doing beers, having a ball. He draws a goalpost on the door, never forget it, gets back. Now this guy's big, right? Goes back and just, wow! I mean, through the door.
So many things have been alleged that this band has done, that if we did everything we've been accused of, we'd have to be 2 bands, and one of them would be dead.
All the rowdy times and wild women on the road didn't help Hank's marriage to Becky.
I think anyone married to someone that suddenly becomes huge during a marriage is very, very hard to deal with.
In 1983, after 6 years of marriage, Hank Jr. and Becky divorced.
Habits like you are to blame.
In the mid-1980s, Hank Jr. was proving that you didn't need the Nashville music machine to become a big country star. He liked to work with his closest friends instead. His buddy Animal on lead guitar, Larry Doolittle merchandising, and his oldest friend, Merle Kilgore, became his manager.
He was going to do things the way that they worked for him, no matter what it did to anybody else. And that was kind of hard for Nashville to take.
I got a shotgun, a rifle, and a 4-wheel drive, and a country boy can survive.
Hank Jr. had not won a major award, even though his career was a freight train barreling down the track.
His crowds get bigger, his hits get bigger. During the early 80s, he's one of the biggest country concert draws, if not the biggest.
And Nashville couldn't ignore him any longer.
And the winner is Hank Williams.
I have been around a while and kind of get the feeling that maybe people were scared of me or the Academy was scared of me. I'm as gentle as a lamb and just sweet as sugar. You don't have to be afraid of me.
Starting in 1986, he was voted Entertainer of the Year 5 times in a row.
And only a handful of acts have ever won back-to-back Entertainer of the Year awards.
Hank followed that up with a Grammy and 4 Emmys.
I think it's great that Hank Jr. did exactly what he did, taking his own path. If it had been the other way, I don't think it would have been nearly as successful, or he wouldn't have been nearly as happy.
For years, he'd been known as one of the rowdiest guys in show business. But he was in his mid-30s now. He'd been married and divorced 3 times and had 3 children.
All my rowdy friends have settled down.
He was at a party one night and everybody went home and went to bed and he's the only one up. That's when he wrote it.
Hank settled down too, in his own way. In 1985, he married Mary Jane Thomas, a 20-year-old model.
I was a surfer chick.
He was twice her age and head over heels in love.
My father hated it. He said, if you're seeing this guy, you're moving out.
She did move out, and they've been together for more than 20 years. They're hunting buddies, and they have 2 children.
A daughter that'll be 13 in a few weeks, and got an 8-year-old son.
You people.
Those who know the rowdy Hank Jr. say, all things must pass.
Yeah, he's a family man. Takes care of his kids, takes his kids to school every day.
And he goes to PTA meetings for things.
Hank's cut back on tour dates and stays closer to home.
Every show he goes to from his home in Paris, Tennessee, on the jet to the show, back that night, back with the family, in bed.
But when Hank Jr. is on stage, he's in overdrive.
Get dogs will be on my porch tonight.
He's not going to give them half a dime. He's going to give them the whole dime.
His fans are still rowdy. These days, even more people know Hank Jr. for his long-running stint doing the theme song for ABC's Monday Night Football.
Are you ready for the football?
The greatest part of Monday Night Football is when that 9-year-old child comes up and says, "Oh, you're the guy, you're the man that sings that song."
He's come a long way from being the kid who imitated his dad on stage. But in 2002, he learned about a little club in the backwoods of Alabama that took him right back into the world of Audrey and Hank. Local folks told a story of how his parents were in the middle of a show here when a man stormed in and started shooting up the place.
Hank and Miss Audrey have to dive through a back window to get out.
He wanted to capture that spirit, and he brought all the musicians in there.
All right, Francis.
The result was the Almira Club album, inspired by his family's colorful past. Hank wrote a song called T-Tot.
Every morning, old T-Tot come around.
A tribute to the man who had taught his father to play guitar.
Don't be sad, be glad. No way you can feel bad when this kid man with a tin hand's hard to play the blues.
Not long after, Hank wrote another tribute to his manager and closest friend, Merle Kilgore, who died in February of 2005.
I went to the office today and found that you weren't there. But the more that I searched, I realized that you were everywhere. Do not grieve, for from heaven he's called. Brother, you won't believe. I have made the biggest, sweetest deal of all.
Through death and love and heartbreak, the Williams family tradition lives on. Hank's oldest son, Shelton, or Hank III as he's known in the music business, has built an eclectic music career of his own.
Hank III is just a killer act.
Hank Jr.'s daughter, Holly, proves that talent runs like a river through this family.
When I picked up a guitar and songs came out, I knew I wanted to play.
As for Hank Jr., after many years of struggle, he's created his own enduring legacy.
For Hank to come out of the shadows of standing, of trying to follow in his dad's footsteps, trying to take that path, and then emerging out of there successful with his own identity and his own songs, I think that's one of the most incredible things that I've ever seen.
He doesn't have to prove anything anymore. He just does it. He's his own man. His dad is up there, and he's extremely proud of him.
Thank you so much,